Earlier today, I went on News Nation to talk about the missing persons case of Nancy Guthrie in Tucson, Arizona. I want to bring you a more in-depth look at this case and the role that genetic genealogy may be playing very soon. I shared some information today with News Nation host Marnie Hughes that hasn't been previously discussed, and I have more to add here at Genealogy Gems. So thanks so much for joining me. Nancy Guthrie's story begins like so many ordinary family weekends and then takes a turn that still doesn't make sense. On Saturday, January 31st, 2026, 84-year-old Nancy Guthrie, the mother of Today's Show host, anchor Savannah Guthrie, had dinner with family in Tucson, Arizona. Around 9:45 that night, a relative dropped her back at her home, and a few minutes later, the garage door closed behind her, just as it had countless times before. Sometime in the dark hours that followed, something went terribly wrong. At about 1:47 a.m., Nancy's doorbell camera was disconnected, and roughly 25 minutes later, motion was detected outside her front door. Data that investigators would later recover from the device's back end, even though there was no active subscription at the time. The digital ghost of a recording would become one of the most important clues. It's a masked figure in dark clothing, wearing gloves, carrying a backpack, and moving near Nancy's home. By late Sunday morning, Nancy failed to appear for church. I guess she would regularly do that with a friend of hers, and they would do that online. And that's when her family's uneasiness really turned into alarm. The friend notified family that she had not shown up, and loved ones went to check on her, found her missing, and called 911 just after noon. Deputies arrived, launched searches with drones and dogs, and soon announced that something that everyone had feared. They believed Nancy had been taken against her will. Then the case took an even stranger twist. Within days, local media outlets and investigators began receiving ransom messages, emails and letters demanding millions of dollars in Bitcoin in exchange for Nancy's safe return, complete with deadlines and chilling threats. Savannah and her siblings released an emotional video plea, speaking directly to their mother's captor and begging for communication and proof that she was alive.
Our mom is our heart and our home. She's 84 years old. Her health, her heart is fragile. She lives in constant pain. She is without any medicine. She needs it to survive. She needs it not to suffer. We too have heard the reports about a ransom letter in the media. As a family, we are doing everything that we can. We are ready to talk. However, we live in a world where voices and images are easily manipulated. We need to know, without a doubt, that she is alive and that you have her. We want to hear from you, and we are ready to listen.
The FBI joined the investigation, and they announced a $50,000 reward for information. It's underscoring how serious and complex this case had become. Even as the family endured fake ransom attempts and imposter notes, real evidence continued to surface at Nancy's home. Investigators reported signs of forced entry and later blood evidence on the front porch, DNA that suggested that Nancy had been injured in the course of her abduction. They also collected DNA from the property that did not belong to Nancy or her close family and contacts, hinting at an unknown person who had been there. 2 weeks into the search, a new and potentially pivotal clue appeared, not at the house, but along a roadside about 2 miles away. A black glove. It was one of roughly about 16 gloves they recovered from fields and ditches in the area, and of course many of those had been discarded by volunteer searchers. But this one was different. The FBI has now confirmed that it contains the DNA profile of an unknown male, and that it appears to match the type of glove worn by the masked figure in the doorbell footage from the night that Nancy disappeared. That profile is entered into federal databases. They have sent it off to a private lab in Florida. They have some initial results, and I understand that the glove is being sent back. And this really may become the key that finally gives this faceless suspect a name. So let's talk specifics on where this case is headed and provide some insights into the genetic genealogy aspects of it. As I record this, we are waiting for the CODIS results. Now, CODIS stands for Combined DNA Index System. This is an FBI-managed program and software suite that it's used by federal and state and local forensic laboratories. It contains DNA profiles from convicted offenders, felony arrestees, and forensic evidence from unsolved crime scenes. So this means it can help connect crime scenes to suspects, serial offenders, and missing persons. However, we need some perspective on CODIS. It only contains about 6% of the U.S. population. So statistically speaking, the chances are low that they will actually find an exact hit. And that means that law enforcement will likely need to turn their attention to genetic genealogy for answers. Now, there's a big difference between CODIS and direct-to-consumer databases like FamilyTreeDNA and GEDmatch. These websites and databases can include family trees. CODIS doesn't. There, it has to be an exact match with somebody who's already been tested and entered into the system. But of course, when genealogists are doing their family history research, as we do here at Genealogy Gems, DNA is one piece of evidence. It's one of the things that many, many people do, and they upload their results to databases. Now, FamilyTreeDNA does allow law enforcement to access their database and use it for those purposes, as well as GEDmatch. And as I said, the real big difference here is you don't have to have an exact match. This is beautiful because it means even if you have a distant match, and these programs will tell you to what degree of distance we're talking about, if that person who matches the DNA sample has a family tree, you are off and running, because now you can start to try to build out a tree and do a lot of investigation within that tree to see where there may be a connection. So for example, I was logging into my FamilyTreeDNA account last night, and I noticed that I had like about 3 exact matches. I had several that were 1-step, 2-step away from me, and it goes back further and further. About half of them seem to have their tree information on there as well. So typically these are other genealogists who are not only doing their testing, but working on their tree. And this adds so much to the equation. So now if I'm looking at trees of matches and it says they are 1 step away from me or 2 steps away from me, I can start to inspect their tree if indeed they've uploaded that information and be able to compare surnames with my tree. Now, in the case of the DNA profile they have gleaned from this glove, they are not going to have the name of somebody. So we're not going to have surnames that we can go look for. However, we can look for locations, and that is a key part of this. So you can zero in on trees of related people and find out maybe who's in the Arizona area or the surrounding area. Weed out a lot of people by age bracket. We have a sense of maybe the age of the person that has been seen in the porch camera footage, and that's going to help a lot. If that person is perhaps, say, between the ages of 20 and 50, then that really eliminates a lot of people in these trees, as does females. So we can take half, basically, of the trees out right off the bat. So between taking out the women, going into the locations, and then zeroing in on the date of birth, you can make a lot of progress very quickly. And the more matches that we have, the more trees we have to correlate. MyHeritage is now the genealogy tree company that connects to FamilyTreeDNA. And so they will be looking at a lot of those extensive family trees. And of course, not everybody posts their tree along with their DNA. We'll get back to more on that in just a moment, but let's talk about how many people have actually tested. What kind of a gene pool are we looking at? Well, according to a 2025 poll, about 22% of American adults, that's over 26 million people, have tested. Now, the beauty of this is, again, in comparison with CODIS, we do not have to have an exact match. So it's 26 million people and all of the people related to them. In reality, if one of your relatives gets their DNA tested, you've essentially had your DNA tested in some form because those connections can be made. So it really creates a cluster research situation where we can spread out beyond the initial person and, again, look at locations, birth dates, and the sex of the person. Now, this brought up a really interesting aspect to me that I really hadn't heard anybody else talk about online on these news reports. And it was something that I did talk to Marnie Hughes today about. There's been discussion that the perpetrator may have been from Mexico. And I want to play a clip for you from that interview that she did with me today, where we talk about what that means in this case. You know, last year they did a poll and they found out that about 22% of Americans have had their DNA tested. But this brings up a really interesting point. With the proximity of Nancy's house to the border, we know that there's a possibility that this may actually be somebody who was born and perhaps living in Mexico. And if that's the case, Mexicans typically are less than 1% of them are testing their DNA. So we have to kind of brace ourselves for where this individual is from and therefore what the potential might be for the population that they can pull from to build a family tree.
Wow, I hadn't heard that before. Lisa, thank you for pointing that out. Yeah, we're very close to the border, and that certainly plays a part in this investigation. I appreciate your expertise and knowledge on this. Thank you.
So this is really something for investigators to keep in mind. Now, the good news is, even if the person is a Mexican national, there is a very good chance that perhaps somebody in their family, even their extended family, has migrated to the United States. And then the hope is that they may, or somebody, again, in their family may have gotten tested. So we don't want to give up hope on this, but it's something to keep in mind and keep our expectations kind of in line in terms of what we can expect depending on the background of this person. And that leads us to a discussion about the companies that law enforcement is likely going to tap into to be able to do this genetic genealogy. They don't typically have genetic genealogists on staff, and so they turn this over to a company like Othram or Parabon to do the testing for them. And not only do they have amazing genetic genealogists on staff, but they also have cutting-edge technology that is unique to each of their companies. Othram does an amazing job with their mapping. They were very involved in the case in Idaho and have solved hundreds and hundreds of cold cases. This mapping technology is going to be tapping into these family trees, getting all of the data, the results, and it can do it at such a faster rate than has been done in the past. Parabon offers something else that is really unique and worth keeping our eyes on, and that is their snapshot technology. Particularly in the case if we don't get a match or we cannot build out a genetic family tree that tells us who this person is, they can still give us a lot of information that can be taken advantage of as they go forward. Snapshot can create a listing of the traits of this person. What might this person even look like? In fact, maybe even create a composite sketch based on the DNA and the traits that we would expect to see in a person who provided that DNA. So there is always hope, and genetic genealogy continues to be on the forefront of providing that hope. Let's talk a bit about the glove. This is where the evidence came from, and I think it's an important point, and again, something else that I'm not hearing a lot about in the news reports that we're currently seeing. This glove was found about 2 miles away from the house, And the FBI says that it's a very good visual match. I have to believe they have other technology that can go even more finite in the comparison between the images found in the camera on the porch and the glove that was actually found on the side of the road. As I watched the news and I heard the excitement about the glove and the unknown male DNA results it provided, there was something very obvious to me that wasn't really being discussed. And that is that we would expect that if this were the glove from the crime scene, and we know there was blood found on the porch, which indicates that Nancy was injured, we would expect to find her DNA on the glove, wouldn't we? And for me, the absence of Nancy's DNA on that glove is very concerning. Now, I'm sure they're looking at this aspect of the case, but I think it's really important for the public to keep this in mind because, again, it helps us kind of put our expectations in the appropriate place. Not having her DNA on that glove, that having been tested by the Florida private lab that the sheriff used, is concerning. It means that we cannot make a direct connection. So ultimately, if we can use genetic genealogy, if CODIS doesn't pan out, and genetic genealogy actually brings us to the name and location potentially of the person who provided that DNA, that's really the beginning of the story, isn't it? At that point, law enforcement has to take on even further investigation and see if they can eliminate that person as a potential suspect or pursue it all the way to the end. Unfortunately, not having her Nancy's DNA on the glove, it kind of leaves out a really critical piece, which is the connection between the person whose DNA was found in that glove and the actual victim herself. It is such a heart-wrenching story. My prayers and our family's prayers have certainly been out for the Guthrie family, for Nancy's safe return. I know all of you who have been involved in genealogy have probably been watching very carefully and thinking about these aspects of how our community can actually be of service in a case like this. We can certainly hold out hope for that. If you want to learn more about the role that genetic genealogy has been playing in law enforcement and cold cases and their amazing resolutions, I would really encourage you to go check out my Genealogy Gems podcast episode, number 217. In that episode, we spent a very thought-provoking hour exploring the Golden State Killer case and the investigators' use of genetic genealogy websites and really all the questions that raised. The Golden State Killer case was kind of close to home for me. I grew up in that area around Modesto, California, when all of that was happening. And I remember the fear that went on in those neighborhoods. And to think that decades later, it was genealogists who helped bring a resolution to that case. It's absolutely phenomenal. We have always been on the cutting edge. When the internet came online, when technology came along, as DNA has surfaced, genealogists have really been using it in such amazing, innovative, and kind of forward-moving ways. And I think that case really gives you a great example, and really one of the earliest examples. It's interesting. When new technology comes along, a lot of times there's a hesitation to take it on. And I imagine from a law enforcement standpoint, the concern is you're going to get to trial and somebody's going to question it. Well, thankfully, we have enough cases under our belt that we know that genetic genealogy is real and it can provide real answers. I hope this rundown has kind of helped give you a little more to think about in terms of this case. We're going to be keeping our eyes on it here. As the DNA results come back from CODIS, we'll be talking about that more, as well as they move into what I think potentially will be the genetic genealogy phase of this investigation. We will continue to bring that to you as well. If you'd like to learn more about finding your family tree, testing your DNA, and finding out what that all means for you and your story, definitely stay here at the Genealogy Gems YouTube channel and on our audio podcast, the Genealogy Gems podcast, which we've been doing for about 17 years now, and looking forward to many more to come. Stay in touch with me. Leave a comment here on the video. Let me know your thoughts on where you think this case is going and the things we've talked about here today. And head over to genealogygems.com and sign up for my free email newsletter, and we will stay in touch and let you know with each breaking news item. Thanks so much for watching, my friends. I'll talk to you soon.